I want to just let you have a chance to say, is there anything that you wanted to bring up? Because I know that we're over on time right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Oh goodness, well we are. Time flies when you're having fun. Um, well, I took a snipe at James Lindsay earlier, of course, which, hardly my first. I saw some of your conversation with him.
We were talking about political grooming and sexual grooming in schools.
Yeah, that. Speaking of a lack of evidence, from what I say, and to your credit, by the way, you say this, in that conversation, but comprehensive sex education improves the lives of young people in basically every way, like in terms of use of contraception, lower pregnancy rates when you're young. And from the research that exists, which isn't much, unfortunately, but from what does exist, programs like that significantly reduce the amount of pedophilic predation against young people. You point this out too. It's much easier to call out stuff like that if you know broadly what's happening. In ignorance, predation reigns. But when young people have terminology they can use to describe what's happened to them or whatever, grim stuff like that. But the weaponization of these terms, I mean, you say political grooming. I have no idea what that means. In terms of actual grooming, like the actual proper term for it, there's just no evidence of this being in any way correlated to like woke, like elementary school teachers or whatever. It's just another like big fear mongering bit. But I guess if you acknowledge that these comprehensive sex education programs are wholly beneficial, what's the concern?
So I'm trying to think how to best summarize this because I don't want to speak for James. I have to say that conversation definitely changed my perspective on many of how I feel about this issue, because as a former sex researcher, I've always been very much in favor of sex education. I think it's very important. And like you said, comprehensive sex education, I've always publicly been a big defender of it. But after talking to James, I realized that what is being taught in the classroom today is not reflective of these programs that were previously helpful to kids. And like you said, helping them have just proper names for their anatomy so that kids are able to protect themselves and they can acknowledge or identify when abuse is happening so they can report it. But now it started to work in these ideas that are nonsensical and are a way of separating children from their parents in terms of the way they see the world. They have these particular views about sexuality and gender. And it's a way of like pretty much everything we've talked about in this conversation, things like gender fluidity, that children can be let's not talk about boys and girls, because if you are a little girl, you may not really be a little girl. I mean, that the possibility that a child is going to grow up to be a transgender adult is so statistically small. And I just don't think it's appropriate to be talking to kids about this stuff because it's very confusing for young children.
Is it?
I think if it's being taught to kindergartners, yes. I think up until even I would say even close to puberty. I mean, kids, their conception of gender is so malleable, developmentally speaking. It's just not, it makes me question. I mean, do you wonder why would a teacher feel that this is so important to teach a child? And if they are, so I don't really want to get too much into Florida's parental rights bill, but the outrage around that. Pardon?
Just the Don't Say Gay bill. Yeah, I was making sure
right.
that I
Well,
had the same one.
Right, that's what it's being called by some people, but
it does prevent you from talking about sexuality, of which gay is one. Yeah.
Right, but no, but it's about teachers teaching this in their curriculum for kids, kindergarten to grade 3, and for precluding parents from those discussions. That's what the bill is. You can say gay. There's fine. Nothing about this thing. There's nothing about saying gay. You can say gay all you want. It's about specifically teaching kids these ideas. So why are these educators so upset that they can't do that?
So
why is that so important?
Well, first of all, the Don't Say Gay bill is borderline unconstitutional. It's restriction of First Amendment and educational rights. So I feel like this isn't really just like a woke left thing. Like there's a reason the entire Democratic Party has condemned it as well. It's not particularly, it's not just, so first of all, it prohibits in curriculum you know, the instruction of anything pertaining to sexuality or gender, but there isn't a very strong legal definition for curriculum as opposed to just classroom discussion. And from the way the Libs of TikTok Twitter account and all of its subsidiaries are acting, it seems like just bringing up the existence of gay or trans people constitutes political grooming to a lot of these types. And then you have the fact that all
I just want to say for
subsequent
Libs of
discussion has to
TikTok,
be-
because I know that you've mentioned them a couple times in this conversation, that I
a
don't
hot
I
topic
don't want
at
to
the
speak
moment.
for them. I know. I don't want to speak for them because I don't know them and I don't know what their intentions are. So I think it's just fair to say that much, right? We don't know. We can't really attribute motive to them because we don't know.
Well, we know they're a far-right political operative whose goal seems to be to paint a bunch of trans and gay and gender non-conforming people who work in education as groomers. In spite of the vast majority of the people they outline, of course, there's no actual evidence of any grooming taking place. It seems like a very cheap and cynical politicization of the word, personally. Anyway, to speak to the broader point here, the issue that I have...
But if you're teaching kids nonsensical ideas about gender and sexuality with the goal of making them woke, is that not a form? It may not be sexual grooming, but is that not political grooming?
There's no such thing as political grooming. Political perspectives inform our biases everywhere we go at all times, and they have in education forever. There's no such thing as political grooming.
I don't think it's been in education forever. I don't think all teachers have always been political and always imposing their politics on kids with the goal of turning those children in the same direction that they're in.
With respect, that's a very ahistorical perspective. The curriculum of the United States, the educational curriculum, has always been informed by people who are making a deliberate effort to instill certain values, whether it be patriotism, whether it be subservience to the state, whether the curriculum be oriented around making people good factory workers or service workers. There's always been a political bias, and the political or progressive inclinations of the time have always had an influence as well. Obviously, you know, people were getting these same accusations back in the 1960s. And likewise, you were getting a lot of this back in the 1920s as well with the suffragette movement, when there were political activists who also happened to work as educators. There was this renewed fear-mongering about them being, you know, they're trying to indoctrinate young boys to be submissive to females or whatever nonsense they would say back then.
But do you not think there are some teachers who would go into teaching saying, you know, my politics, it's not my place to put my politics on my students? Is that not an admirable way to go about teaching?
Depends
if your students don't know what your political, but I don't think it should matter about someone's politics. I think regardless of left or right, you shouldn't be imposing those. If those aren't your children,
racial
it's
equality,
not your place. But that's not is that a political value?
That is absolutely a political position. Yeah, 100%. See, this is the problem that I have. You say, you claim you don't like politics and X or Y, but you only label politics the current zeitgeist, the current culture war discourse, and everything prior to that, all the battles that have been fought and won in centuries past, those aren't politics anymore. It's just accepted. That's not true. Racial equality they literally had to send the National Guard in to protect the Little Rock Nine when they were being integrated in, what was it, Alabama? This was just 2 generations ago. We are not far off from the idea of racial equality being taught in class being a legitimately politically subversive idea.
I feel we should have another discussion about the topic of race, because that's a whole other thing, and we are over time right now. But
right,
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you with your perspectives, and there's so much more I think that we could obviously talk about. But
yeah, to cap off that point, I guess I just want to say that, like, where we invest our energy is very important. And as any person interested in sort of scientific and rational consistency, you know, would adhere to, you need to follow where the data goes. And right now, the data of there being some grooming epidemic in schools, well, hold on, that's actually a problem, but it has nothing to do with woke anything. That's just a problem with teachers. The 2 big places where child grooming happens is in the home and in the church, you know, but Republicans want to focus on the school, and coincidentally only on the
Do you think it's happening in the school at all? Would you acknowledge it's happening at all?
Of course, but actually child sexual predation has been going down over time as wokeness levels rise. I just don't think there's a correlation. I don't think that, like,
I'd need to see that study.
in terms of sexual predation over time. Oh yeah, it used to be way more common than it is now.
With wokeness?
Well,
I can tell if you're being facetious.
I just mean that, like, progressivism, we've only gotten more progressive with time on social issues here in the States, but the amount of child predation that's been recorded has been going down ever since we started tracking stuff like that in, I think, the mid 20th century. Like, the reported instances of child abuse have gone down and down and down, in large part because our society is more integrated with the internet. People have easier access to info that can let them know if abuse is taking place. Stuff like Me Too, it sounds silly, but it does actually get people sort of invested in the mindset that they should report if abuse is happening. And that's good. The less child abuse is happening, the better, But I strongly disagree with this cynical weaponization of the term grooming. Grooming is a serious thing to do, and it's being applied to like teachers who are doing
I feel it's no different from
dances.
Nazis. But go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, if they were calling all these teachers Nazis, I would disagree with that too. But like, there are people getting called groomer. Some teacher lost his job because he said, like, to any trans kids who were rejected by your parents, I love you. The idea of a teacher saying, I love my students.
I think he said, like, I'm your parent now, right? Isn't that the same guy?
Oh, yeah. The idea
I don't think that's appropriate.
I don't think there's anything remotely inappropriate.
Do you understand? Could you see why parents might be uncomfortable at that?
I don't care.
This is one specific case. So I'm saying more broad. This is one case we're talking about, but I think is indicative of something larger that's happening.
The comfort of the parents is not a determining factor in the validity of an educational protocol. If we defer to that, then we'd have Christian fundamentalists suing every school district in America every time evolution is brought up. I mean, we've been down this road, right? Parents have a right to determine the education of their children when they're at home. When they're at a public school, it is up to the institution of the public school. And I think that's a fair and fine thing, because, regardless of, how many TikToks of woke teachers or whatever, for the most part, public education, it does a consistent. I can't say good because American education sucks. So I keep trying to say good, but it's not. It does a bad but nonetheless consistent job of instilling very certain educational premises. The idea that everyone's walking out of public education being some sort of woke bot is not true. If you actually care about your students, or your kids being woke, you want to get them off the internet. The internet is full of access points to very progressive spaces. You could just isolate them and homeschool them, I guess. But the world is getting more progressive. I think this is a good thing that should be celebrated, even if it leads sometimes to cringy teachers doing TikTok dances while talking about how they're teaching their second grade students how the gender binary is fake. Okay, do I think that's appropriate for second graders? I don't know if inappropriate's the word I use. More like stupid. I just don't know if there's a point in it. For me, it should be if you're talking with kids, it's oh yeah, sometimes people are straight, sometimes they're not. Oh yeah, sometimes people are, they're born as boys, they stay boys, sometimes they're stay girls.
But that's
whatever.
a problem because it's teaching kids now, we see the lawsuits that are happening, right? Where there are girls who are transitioning behind their parents' back. The parents don't know. And in some cases, these kids are attempting suicide and the parents were completely kept out of the equation. So that to me is where my concern is coming from.
What does that have to do? Who's being sued there?
The school boards are being sued.
What did they do? If the kids
because
are
transitioning? The teachers were withheld the information from the parents, and in some cases, this is where to me the grooming aspect comes in. They were the ones coaching the kids to take on these identities. Anyway, if you want to come back on another time, I'll have you back on.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sorry. We keep running over. My apologies. I just have to ask though. Last thing. Just last thing. Yeah. I swear to God. No. Would you say the same thing if a kid disclosed they were gay? They had homophobic parents and they told a teacher hey, I think I'm gay, but I can't tell my parents because my parents would beat the shit out of me. And the teacher's oh, that's okay. You live your life, And then later that kid attempted suicide because of social pressure and the school district got sued by the parents. Do you think that'd be a legit lawsuit? Is that grooming or is that just...
So I've thought about that. And I think in that case, the teacher who's being told that the child is in an abusive situation should report that to the authorities. I don't think it should be the teachers. I don't think it's appropriate for the teacher to be the one keeping secrets with the child in any or having a special relationship with the child. That to me is a huge red flag. Whether or not someone has the intention of it being a sexual relationship, it could become a step down that way, or it could maybe not. But I just don't think it's appropriate for people in positions of power to be having secrets with children.
But
do you agree?
Well, not really. I mean, when I was in school, I didn't even know I was gay back then, but good teachers can be another calming authority figure in your life. You spend a whole year with them when you're young, and if there's advice they have, don't get me wrong, the secret relationship is kind of a loaded term. We're talking a wide range here. If a kid discloses something, if there's no avenue to report to the police abuse, I mean, if you report it to the police, then what? Like, they show up at the house and it gets made public and the kid gets beaten within an inch of their life after the police find that there's nothing they can officially charge the parents with because there's no evidence for, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, it
Well, I
seems like
mean,
that'd
but
be a lot
that's
of
an
way to get people
extreme.
hurt.
That's an extreme. I think it should at least be, I mean, if you want to talk about what should be done in that case, I just don't think there are situations, and I think most adults who are put in that position probably would be uncomfortable to say, I don't feel right that a child's telling me something and I have to keep this a secret. They should want to at least, I think, put, if they are concerned about the child's well-being, to put some sort of precautionary measures into
Sometimes just
place,
having a
right?
person to disclose to can be hugely beneficial for the suicidality of queer youth, you know, like the feeling they don't have to keep it hidden from absolutely everyone if they know they have a supportive teacher. I just don't think that leads to like, parents will groom their
I just think
kids
there's a
too,
potential
so
there
it's
for it to be abused, right? There is a potential there for it to be abused.
true, but
If
any
we're normalizing
standard,
the secrets between teachers and kids
well,
from
any
keeping it from their
standard
parents.
where any relationship between like people in a position of power and children can be harmful would include parents, right? I mean, parents, I'm pretty sure
True.
the household's the number one grooming central, grooming station, you know, 8 lines on that on that union station. So it just seems like a sort of weird imbalance, especially since the only thing this is getting focused on is queer issues. Like, it, at the end of the day, look, if a kid is transitioning or like thinks they're a boy or a girl, you know, whatever, and they don't feel comfortable telling their parents, the abuser, as far as I'm concerned, is the parents. Any environment in which a child can't even voice concerns like that or like questions or interests with their parents, talk it out, is one in which, that, as far as I'm concerned, that child's already being abused. The teacher being disclosed to in that case is just probably a modicum of relief for the student, that they don't have to hide everything from everyone. But I'll take a look at the details of the lawsuit. It just seems to me like a lot of this is misdirected anger at trans people trying to be weaponized against institutions that can be sued, because you can't sue every trans kid.